And I'm telling you these stories because they're stories about a magical place. Those of you who are students are in college, in a magical place. The most extraordinary society in history. The most inventive, the most entrepreneurial. I mean, how many of you have an iPhone? Just raise your hand. Okay, how many of you have a BlackBerry? How many of you have an iPad? Okay. How many of you how many of you are on Facebook? All right. That's what you think about it. How many of you use a credit card at an ATM to get money? Have you ever thought about just the process you're involved in? Some of you are old enough, you'll remember when you actually worried about what time the bank closed on Fridays. It's very hard to explain to younger people that there was a time that the banker's hours actually meant something. Banker's hours today are 24/7. You can find an ATM and get cash almost anywhere. So how does this relate to where we are? Here's the challenge. This is why I believe this is the most important election in our lifetime. We are at the crux of deciding to quit being American. We have a president who believes in a European socialist model. We have a president who believes in a secular model. We have a president who believes in the writing of Saul Alinsky, who used to teach Alinsky's radicalism. But this is not about Obama. Obama is just the personalization of a 50-year trend. We have judges who think they should write the law. We have bureaucrats who think that they can dictate to us. We have centralized power in Washington, building around it huge lobbying systems. We're in grave danger of the country becoming this government that presides over us, rather than a government that serves us. Now, the core of this campaign is a choice. On the one hand, you have Barack Obama, who legitimately wants to be the leader of a country in which the politicians define our future. On the other hand, you have the Declaration of Independence, which is a very different model. The Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. This is really important. It's the opposite of liberalism. Liberalism argues that there's situation ethics and you don't really know and you should be careful, you shouldn't be judgmental. Founding Fathers said baloney. The Founding Fathers said, look, if you look deeply into the human heart, there are certain core truths from which you can design government. They went on to say, and then it goes on to say, these rights are unalienable. Now what that means is no bureaucrat, no judge, no politician can come between you and God. They're unalienable. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, two parts to this. Happiness is an 18th century phrase meaning wisdom and virtue, not hedonism and acquisition. The Founding Fathers believed that a wise people could remain free and a foolish people would end up in a dictatorship. Second, you're allowed to pursue happiness. Notice, it doesn't say you're guaranteed happiness. You're guaranteed the right to pursue. So there's no provision in the Declaration of Independence for happiness stamps for the under-happy. There's no provision in the Declaration of Independence for a federal Department of Happiness to issue an annual happiness report. And if you had said to the Founding Fathers that we were going to elect politicians who'd come into a room like this and say, I'm going to take from the overly happy and redistribute to the underly happy, they would have thought that was a person of such arrogance. First of all, to believe that they had the knowledge to know who should get what. And second, to believe that they had the right to take from one American to give to another American. So let's be clear. The election this fall is an election about the very nature of America. It's not an election about Barack Obama. We know who he is. It's an election about America. What kind of country do we want to give our children and grandchildren? I want to give our children and grandchildren a country based on the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Federalist Papers. Now, let me apply all this to a very practical example. Energy. You have a president who believes in a future in which we are punished out of driving trucks and cars by steadily rising prices, and in which we will transfer our tax income to pay people to buy the appropriate Obama-approved car. So, for example, if you want to buy a Volt, you get a $7,500 tax credit. Now, the average family that buys a Volt earns $170,000 a year. So, ironically, Obama's policy actually transfers money to successful people, as long as they do what Obama wants. Now, this has not been particularly successful. They've only made 7,500 Volts this year. They've stopped the production line, because even with a $7,500 tax incentive, there's a very limited market for them. I've tried to explain to my liberal friends, you know, you can't put a gun rack in a Volt. Now, to be fair, let me be fair about this. A man in Atlanta who owns a Volt did a YouTube video in which he put a gun rack in the trunk. And a friend of mine from Camilla, Georgia said, yeah, but where do you put the deer? Now, I want to be very clear though, I'm not against the Volt, I'm not against the Prius. But I believe you should be allowed to take the money you earn that is your money, and you should be allowed to buy the car or truck you want, not the car that Obama wants. This is what is called freedom. And we want to be a country that has freedom, not a country that is dictated to by a handful of elitist politicians. Now, the president's policy inherently involves being against American energy. He's against coal. He said openly in 2008 he wants to bankrupt any future utility that uses coal. He is against oil and gas. The fact is, he appointed a secretary of anti-energy in Dr. Chu. Because Dr. Chu's position is he's against American energy. What Dr. Chu wants, and he said this publicly in 2008, he wants Americans to pay European prices for gasoline. That is $9 or $10 a gallon. He was asked last week in a House hearing, what was he going to do to bring down the price of gasoline, which was causing so much pain to the American people? And his answer was nothing. He said, I am not in the business of reducing the cost of gasoline. I'm in the business of finding replacements for gasoline. And the example he gave was a recent battery research breakthrough that within 15 to 20 years will be terrific. Now that doesn't help a single American this year or next year or the year after. And this is a core question. It turned out yesterday that Dr. Chu does not own a car. So what you have is a government bureaucrat who is driven around in a government car with you paying for the gas, while the government employee who drives him fills up the tank. He does not have a clue what's happening to normal Americans in normal towns buying gasoline, which is why I would abolish the Department of Energy, which has been a spectacular failure. So then you ask the question, what would you do about energy? I have a very simple model. I want an American energy plan that guarantees that no president will ever again bow to a Saudi king. That means we need to be prepared to drill offshore. We need to be prepared to drill on federal land. So the president, who really has a split personality about this, His ideological side really wants to get us out of oil and really wants to make us buy exotic vehicles. His political side, all of his political advisors are saying to him, this is really dangerous. Because if gasoline prices keep going up, it's going to cripple the economy going into the election. And it was very interesting in his press conference when he was asked about oil and gasoline prices, his first response was about his own re-election. It wasn't about what's happening to American families, it wasn't what's happening to the American economy, it was about his re-election. So he's got this split, which one is he loyal to? So he's now given, in response to my calling for an American energy plan, he has given 3 speeches and a press conference in about 10 days. And he's very consistent in being confused. And let me explain what I mean. First of all, he says, there are no silver bullets. This is clearly a phrase he likes because he's used it 4 times now. Well, Mr. President, there is a presidential pen. And a presidential pen could today sign 3 documents that would make America better off in energy. First, you could sign approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. That would bring 700,000 barrels a day of Canadian oil to Houston. And people in the media have said, well, it takes 40 years. It's baloney. Under normal circumstances, it takes 2 years. If we want expedited construction, it can take 1 year. We know how to build pipelines. We build pipelines all the time. So that's part 1. Number 2, you can sign reauthorizing development in Texas and Louisiana offshore. That's about 400,000 barrels. You can sign opening up designated parts of Alaska. That's about 1,200,000 barrels. There are 3 specific examples where you could increase the supply of oil by 2,300,000 barrels a day, 800 million plus barrels a year. Keeping the money here at home, beginning to move towards energy sufficiency, creating jobs. Instead of creating jobs in Saudi Arabia, let's create jobs in Mississippi. The president goes on to say, the Republicans have 3 strategies for oil. 1, drill. 2, drill. 3, drill. Well, I want to say, Mr. President, for a change, you got it right. Yeah. The president then goes on to say, this is what's just, I really think this speech will be studied by historians as an example of the inherent cognitive dissonance, a fancy term in psychology, meaning that when you're faced with a fact which conflicts with your worldview, you reject the fact. And it's amazing, because he then says, drilling will not work. It's very adamant about it. Okay, and do any of you notice what his solution was? Algae. Algae, right? Algae. How many of you knew algae before I told you? Come on. Everybody who already knew algae, raise your hand. We'll see how rapidly the country's learning. This is good. See, well, I want to run this fall. I want part of the campaign to be President Algae versus President Drilling. Clistic puts up there a lot of these, and I test out ideas. And sometimes she nods yes, and sometimes she says later, don't do that every day. So I'm always checking to see which ones are kind of working. So I want to share with you something I said earlier today that I'm intrigued with. I'm thinking that maybe my campaign should put out like a little set for a desk set that has a little bottle of algae and an Obama bumper sticker, and then a little drilling rig and a Newt bumper sticker. And it kind of says, you choose your future. And we just kind of invent the campaign as we go along here. So think about this. We're thinking about maybe having volunteers this summer who will go and stand at gas stations, and when people pull in, they'll run over with a bottle of algae and say, this is President Obama's solution. Would you like some for your car now?